Judge looked at my daughter and her husband across the courtroom. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, setting down the folder she'd been reading, "is it true that you changed the locks on your mother's home while she was admitted to St. Joseph's Medical Center?" My son-in-law Derek shifted in his seat. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Derek shook it off. "We were concerned about her belongings," he said. "She wasn't in a position to manage the property. She was recovering from a stroke," the judge said. Not a question. A statement, flat and cold as January pavement. "Yes, Your Honor. And you changed the locks the same day she was admitted." Silence. I watched from my seat beside my attorney, Margaret, and I thought about the drive over that morning. My left hand still trembled slightly when I was tired, a reminder the stroke had left behind, like a signature it didn't need to sign twice. I'd pressed it flat against my thigh the whole ride. I didn't want Derek to see it shake. I didn't want to give him that. "Mr. Hargrove," the judge continued, "the filing before me claims that your mother-in-law, Beverly Caldwell, is mentally incapacitated and requires a court-appointed conservator to manage her estate." She looked up. "I've reviewed her medical records, her neurologist's evaluation, her financial history, and her attorney's documentation. Would you like me to tell you what I found?" He said nothing. "I found a 71-year-old woman who built a small business from her kitchen table, sold it for enough money to buy her daughter and son-in-law a 4-bedroom house in Clearwater, paid off their car loans, and contributed $11,000 a year to her granddaughter's college fund for 3 years running." She paused, and then had a stroke, and then came home from the hospital to find her locks had been changed. My daughter Melissa was staring at the table. I'd been watching her face since we sat down. She hadn't looked at me once. "The conservatorship petition is denied," the judge said. "Mrs. Caldwell is clearly competent. I'm also ordering the petitioners to cover her legal fees in defending this action, payable within 45 days. She looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Hargrove, I want to be very plain with you. What you filed here today was not a wellness check. It was a financial maneuver. I am not going to let it stand." The gavel came down. Margaret squeezed my arm lightly. "Well done," she said. Across the aisle, I could hear Derek say something low and sharp to his attorney. Melissa still hadn't looked at me. She stood up, gathered her purse, and walked out without a word. Derek followed, his face red in the way it always got when things didn't go the way he planned. Their lawyer trailed out behind them, looking like a man who'd already mentally drafted his invoice. In the parking lot, Margaret walked me to my car. My neighbor, Diane, had driven me. She'd offered without being asked, which is how I knew she was the real kind of friend. "They'll owe you around $8,000 for legal costs," Margaret said. "If they don't pay within 45 days, we move to enforce Parkwell. Wage garnishment, lien on the property, all the standard tools." "They won't pay," I said. "Probably not." "That's all right." She nodded, and I think she understood what I meant. This was never about the money. Diane drove me home without asking a lot of questions, which I appreciated. I sat in a passenger seat and watched suburban Tampa slide past. Gas stations, strip malls, a Publix I used to take Melissa to when she was small. Back when she'd still sit in the cart, even though she was technically too big for it. Back when she'd still let me push her. By the time we pulled into my driveway, my phone had 17 missed calls, all from Melissa. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I made coffee, changed into my house clothes, sat down at the kitchen table, and then I played them. The first few were controlled. "Mom, call me. We need to talk about this. This is not what you think." The middle ones got louder. "You have no idea what you've done. Derek is humiliated. You did this publicly. You could have just talked to us." And then the last one, to when she'd left at 4:22 in the afternoon, 2 hours after the hearing, was different. Quieter. Worse somehow. "You always made everything about yourself, even this. I hope you're satisfied. I saved them all to a folder on my laptop. Documentation. You learn to keep documentation." I sat there for a while in the kitchen I'd lived in for 23 years, the same kitchen where I'd run my bookkeeping service out of, back when Melissa was in middle school. I'd sit at this very table with a second phone line, an adding machine, and client folders stacked in the corner, and she'd do her homework at the other end. Some evenings she'd ask what I was working on, and I'd explain. Invoices, quarterly estimates, payroll tax. She seemed genuinely interested then. Or maybe I just needed to believe that. I'd sold a business 11 years ago for $340,000. I wasn't trying to brag about it. Honestly, the number surprised me too. I'd built it slowly, one small business client at a time, mostly restaurants and landscaping companies, and one very disorganized orthodontist who called me every April in a panic. When the offer came in, I was 60 and my knees hurt, and I thought, this is enough. Sold it, put the money in a mix of index funds and a money market account, kept my expenses small. And then Melissa and Derek had started struggling. The house thing came first. They'd been renting in Clearwater, and Derek had this idea that real estate was where the money was, and they'd found a place they loved but couldn't qualify for the mortgage on their own. I'd helped with the down payment, $74,000. I told myself it was an investment in their future. Then the cars. Derek's truck had broken down, and the repair estimate was more than the truck was worth, and they found something on a dealership lot, and I co-signed and then eventually just paid off the loan because the monthly call about being short was getting exhausting. The college fund for my granddaughter, Paige, that one I didn't resent. She hadn't done anything. 3 years of $11,000 deposits into a 529 account, that was for her. The monthly transfers started smaller, 500 here, 800 there whenever they had a shortfall. Then Derek got passed over for a promotion, and Melissa said they were barely covering groceries, and I started sending $2,000 a month, regularly, without being asked each time, because it was easier. I want to be honest about something because several of the comments I later read on the video, I didn't even know there would be a video. I'll explain that. Several of them asked why I had given that much to begin with, and at least one person said I had brought this on myself. They weren't entirely wrong. I was lonely after my husband passed. Melissa was all I had nearby. I thought money was a way of staying close, staying useful, staying needed. I didn't understand the difference between being generous and being a resource until the morning I woke up in a hospital bed with the left side of my face drooping and my left hand useless, and I called Melissa's number, and she answered on the second ring, and I told her what had happened, and she said, I remember this with perfect clarity. She said, Mom, we have the thing with Derek's parents this weekend. Can this wait? It cannot wait, I said. I am in the hospital. And she sighed. I don't know if she sighed at me, or at the situation, or at Derek standing next to her saying something in the background. I don't know, and I stopped trying to figure it out somewhere around my third day of physical therapy. What I know is that I lay in that hospital bed for 9 days, and my daughter came once, on day 4, for 40 minutes, and spent most of it on her phone in the hallway. Derek didn't come at all. My neighbor Diane visited every day, brought me crossword puzzles and a container of her chicken tortilla soup, which is the best thing I've ever eaten, and I told her so. My old client, the disorganized orthodontist, his name is Phil, and I still hear from him at Christmas. He sent flowers. My daughter's husband did not come. When I was discharged, I took a rideshare home from the hospital because I hadn't asked anyone for a ride. I didn't want to. I walked up to my front door with my overnight bag and my discharge papers and my new medication schedule, and I put my key in the lock, and the lock didn't work. I stood on my own front porch for about 30 seconds before I understood what had happened. Then I sat down on the front step because my legs weren't quite steady yet, and I called Margaret. Margaret had been my attorney for 15 years. She handled my business contracts, my husband's estate, various small matters over the years. She answered on the third ring, and I told her what was happening, and she said, Beverly, don't touch anything. Take photos. I'm calling you back in 10 minutes. She called back in 8. Derek filed a petition for conservatorship this morning, she said. He's claiming cognitive impairment from the stroke. He's attached a medical statement. She paused. Beverly, the statement is from a Dr. Carl Rennick. Do you know that name? I didn't. He's a general practitioner in Pinellas County. He's never treated you. He's never met you. The statement says he examined you on March 14th. I was in the hospital on March 14th. I know, Margaret said. I sat on my front step for a moment with that information. The azaleas I'd planted along the walkway were starting to bloom. I put them in the year my husband died because he'd always wanted them, and I'd always said we'd get around to it, and then we never did. They were a soft coral color in the afternoon light. What do I need to do? I asked. Nothing tonight, Margaret said. I'm getting you emergency access to the property restored. You'll be home by tonight, and then we're going to start building a case. Diane let me wait at her house. We drank tea, and she didn't make me explain everything, and I was grateful for that. I was home by 7:30. New lock, my key, Margaret had handled it. I sat down at my kitchen table and I made a list. In the weeks between that evening and the court date, I did several things. I called my neurologist, Dr. Okafor, and asked for a formal cognitive evaluation. She'd already scheduled a follow-up given the stroke, but I asked her to document everything thoroughly. I did the evaluation. The results showed some mild residual fatigue and a slight processing slowdown under stress, both common after a stroke, both improving. Nothing that came anywhere close to cognitive impairment. My memory was intact. My judgment was intact. My reading comprehension was intact. I scored in the normal range on every relevant assessment. I also called my financial advisor and quietly moved my primary accounts. I wasn't taking chances. I updated my will. Paige, my granddaughter, received the largest portion held in trust until she turned 25, administered by Margaret. I left a portion to 2 charities my husband had cared about. I left Derek and Melissa a combined total of $1, which Margaret told me was a legal formality to prevent a successful challenge on grounds of being forgotten. I had not forgotten them. I had simply decided. I stopped the monthly transfers, all of them, the same day I got home from the hospital, and I waited. The first sign was the credit card call. Melissa called 3 weeks after I got home, very controlled, asking if I could help them with a balance that had come due. I said no. She asked why. I said because I was recovering from a stroke and needed to focus on my own finances. She said that wasn't fair. I said I'd call her later and I hung up. The calls after that got less controlled. My granddaughter Paige called me from college in early April. She was 19, a sophomore at University of South Florida, studying nursing. She called from her dorm room and I could tell she was trying to keep her voice steady. "Grandma, are you okay? Dad, Derek, was telling Mom you're not doing well, that you're confused." "Who told you that?" "Derek. He said the stroke affected your memory. He said you've been making bad financial decisions." "Paige," I said, "I am fine. I want you to know that directly from me. I had a stroke and I am recovering. My mind is intact. What you're hearing from Derek is not true." A pause. Then, "Okay." Another pause. "Grandma, they're not paying my college fund this semester." "I know. I stopped sending the transfers." "Oh!" She was quiet for a moment. "Is it because of what happened?" "Yes," I said. "But I want you to know that your portion is separate. Your 529 account, that money is yours, and it's protected. You will not lose your education because of what's happening between your mother and me." She exhaled. "Okay, thank you. Okay." Then, quieter. "I kind of figured something was wrong. Derek's been weird for a while." "I know, honey. Mom always does what he says." That one landed somewhere I didn't expect. The court date was May 11th. Margaret was thorough. She submitted my neurologist's evaluation, my cognitive testing results, a full accounting of my financial history to demonstrate coherent long-term decision-making, and documentation of Dr. Rennick's fraudulent statement, including a note that he had never treated me and that the examination date he listed corresponded to dates I was admitted to St. Joseph's. The day before the hearing, Derek's lawyer apparently reached out to Margaret about settling quietly. Margaret told me, and I asked her what that meant. "They want you to restore the monthly payments and agree not to pursue the legal costs," she said. "In exchange, they withdraw the petition." I told her to decline. After the hearing, sitting in my car in the parking garage with Diane behind the wheel and the engine not yet started, I thought about what the judge had said. What you filed here today was not a wellness check. It was a financial maneuver. I kept turning that over. Because here's the thing I hadn't fully let myself say out loud yet. I had spent 11 years treating my daughter like she needed protecting. From financial stress, from instability, from the ordinary difficulty of adult life. And Derek had looked at that and seen an opportunity, yes, but Melissa had let him. Melissa had stood in the courtroom that morning and not looked at me once. I wasn't entirely sure which hurt more. Diane started the engine. "Mexican food," she said. Yes, I said. Absolutely yes. The weeks that followed were strange. The calls stopped almost immediately. Both Melissa and Derek went quiet. Margaret kept me updated through legal channels. They had not paid the court-ordered fees. They were falling behind on the house. A property tax notice had come in Derek's name, unpaid from the previous quarter. Through a process I won't pretend to fully understand, Margaret had access to some of this information as part of the conservatorship case documentation. Paige called every Sunday. We talked about her classes, her clinicals, a boy in her pharmacology study group she described as probably not a disaster. I didn't bring up her parents. She did, sometimes, briefly, then moved on. I let her lead. About 6 weeks after the hearing, Paige mentioned carefully that her parents had sold the truck. Derek's driving Mom's old car now. Mom said the payment was too high. Okay, I said. She got a job too, at a dental office, front desk. A pause. She hates it, I think. But she's doing it. I said I was glad to hear that. Another week passed. Then Melissa called. Not Derek, Melissa. She called on a Tuesday evening, and I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Maybe I was still hoping, even after everything. Mom. Her voice was different. Not the controlled anger from the voicemails. Not the careful manipulation she'd been managing since I got home from the hospital. Just tired. Flat. Can we meet somewhere? I asked where. She said anywhere I wanted. So I picked a Panera near the beach, because it was public and I liked a soup, and there was plenty of parking. She was already there when I arrived. She'd lost weight. The blouse she was wearing was one I recognized from 3 years ago, which told me something. She stood when she saw me come in, started to hug me, then stopped. I sat down across from her. We ordered. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I'm going to leave Derek, she said. I didn't say anything. I've been talking to a counselor. For about a month. It's been clarifying. She looked up. Mom, I let him make decisions I should have been making. For years. I knew the conservatorship petition was his idea, and I went along with it because I was scared, and because I'd gotten so used to going along with things. Her jaw tightened. He told me you were getting worse, that you needed help managing things. I think I wanted to believe him because it was easier than admitting what we'd been doing. I looked at my daughter across the table. She was 51 years old. She'd been a difficult teenager and a close friend in her 20s and a gradually distant figure through her 30s. And then this, whatever this was, this version that had let her mother come home from the hospital to a changed lock. I said, you didn't come. When I had the stroke, you came once, I know. 4 days in and you stayed 40 minutes. I know. She pressed her lips together. There's no excuse for that. No, I said, there isn't. The Panera hummed around us. Someone's toddler was making a vigorous argument in a high chair 2 tables over. The window beside us showed a slice of blue sky and a palm tree. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Melissa said. I know I don't have any right to that right now. You don't, I said, but you're here. You came. That's a beginning, maybe. She nodded, swallowed. I need to ask you something directly, I said. Not as your mother. As a woman who lost 9 days in a hospital bed while her daughter came once, I kept my voice level. Was this always about the money, since the beginning? Was any of it about me? She was quiet for a long moment. I watched her face, and I let her sit with it. I think, she said slowly, that it started being about the money so gradually that I didn't notice when I stopped seeing you as a person with your own life and needs, and started seeing you as the person who handled things. She paused. That's what Derek did, and I let him do it to both of us. I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there was one. We sat for another 40 minutes. We talked about Paige, mostly. About Melissa's job, which she was making work. About the house, which she said Derek was being difficult about in the separation, but which she expected to sell within the quarter. When we were leaving, she held the door open for me the way she used to when she was 12 and going through a very formal phase where she decided that holding doors for adults was important. I don't know why that particular memory surfaced right then. It did. Mom, she said in the parking lot, did you change the will? Yes, I said. She nodded like she'd expected it. It can change again, I said. Or it can't. That depends on what happens from here. She nodded again, said okay, hugged me, carefully, briefly. I let her. Diane was waiting in the car. How was it? She asked. Complicated, I said. All the important things are, she said, and pulled out of the parking lot. The summer moved on. Melissa filed for divorce in July. Derek contested several things and was unpleasant about most of them, which surprised no one. The house sold in September for $98,000. After splitting the proceeds per their agreement and paying various debts, Melissa ended up with around $180,000. She found a rental apartment in St. Pete, 2 bedrooms, so Paige had a room when she came home on breaks. She paid the court-ordered legal fees on day 43, 2 days before the deadline. I don't know if that was pride or strategy or just timing. I didn't ask. I started volunteering 2 mornings a week at the tax assistance program through the library, helping seniors and low-income families with their returns, which let me use my bookkeeping brain without the pressure of running a business. I liked the work. I liked the people. A retired postal worker named George at the next table always brought in a thermos of terrible coffee and offered me some every single week, and every single week I said yes, and it was always terrible, and it was always fine. Paige came home for Thanksgiving and stayed 5 days. We cooked too much food and she told me stories about her clinicals that I mostly understood, and we watched 2 entire seasons of her British baking show, and she fell asleep on the couch the 3rd night, and I put a blanket over her and sat in the armchair for a while just watching her breathe. Some things are worth protecting at any cost. She was one of them. Melissa came for one afternoon. We had coffee. We talked about Paige. We talked about an aunt she'd reconnected with on my husband's side. We didn't talk about the past year. Not directly. There would be time for that, or there wouldn't, and I had stopped forcing timelines on things I couldn't control. She was leaving when she paused at the door. Mom, I need to say something. Okay. I spent a long time thinking you were easy to take advantage of. That you were too willing, too available. She looked at the doorframe. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot. But especially that. You were patient. There's a difference. I thought about that for a moment. There is, I said. After she left, I made another cup of coffee. Real coffee, not George's, and sat at the kitchen table in the house I'd lived in for 23 years. The house where I'd raised my daughter. The house I'd come back to from the hospital on a Tuesday evening to find the lock changed. The house I'd sat in that same evening and made my list. I was 71 years old. My left hand still trembled slightly when I was tired. The neurologist said it might always do that, or it might fade, and either way I was doing well. I had an attorney I trusted and a neighbor who brought soup and a granddaughter who called every Sunday and a retired postal worker who offered me bad coffee every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I thought about what a friend of mine had said at dinner a few weeks earlier, over the fish tacos at the place near the water where we'd been going since before our husbands died. She'd said, Beverly, most people need to lose something before they understand what it was worth. I thought she was right. I thought about Melissa in that Panera, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. The way she'd said, I stopped seeing you as a person with your own life. She was beginning, maybe, to understand what she'd had. And I thought about Derek, wherever he was in his 1-bedroom rental. Probably furious, probably convinced I had done something to him. He would never understand it. Some people need to lose everything and still won't learn the lesson. Jennifer hadn't. Derek hadn't. He was already the kind of man who would move on to the next situation and make the same choices. But Melissa was different. Or she was trying to be. I wasn't ready to trust that yet. I was watching. Carefully. With open eyes. My phone rang. Paige, a Tuesday this time instead of Sunday, which made me smile before I even answered. Grandma. Okay, so, study group guy, he asked me to dinner and I said yes, and now I need you to tell me if that was an error in judgment. Tell me 3 things about him, I said. He's pre-med but not annoying about it. He remembered I mentioned my grandmother as a bookkeeper and asked me follow-up questions the next week, and he has a dog. That's not an error in judgment, I said. She laughed. It sounded like the kind of thing worth staying healthy for. I sipped my coffee and looked out the window at the backyard, where the azaleas my husband had always wanted were already starting to set buds for next spring. Every year they came back. Every year I thought about him when they did. Some things you rebuild from scratch. Some things just keep growing on their own if you let them. I'd finally learned to tell the difference. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any mystical sense, just the plain, ordinary mechanics of it. The way every choice you make becomes the foundation the next one stands on, until eventually you're either standing on solid ground or sinking through a floor you built yourself one bad decision at a time. Derek made his choices. He looked at a 71-year-old woman recovering from a stroke and saw a financial problem to be solved in his favor. He filed fraudulent paperwork. He changed my locks. He spent years building the life on money he hadn't earned. And when that money stopped, the whole structure came apart because it had no foundation of its own. That's not punishment. That's just physics. And Melissa, my daughter, that one is harder to explain cleanly because I love her, and the people we love don't fit into simple categories of villain and victim. She made choices, too. She chose convenience over character, year after year, slowly, the way you don't notice the temperature dropping until you're already cold. She chose Derek's version of events over her own eyes. She came to the hospital once in 9 days. These were not accidents. They were decisions, even when she wasn't fully aware she was making them. What I had to learn because I wasn't born knowing it, is that protecting people from consequences isn't love. It looks like love. It feels like love. It feels like love, especially when you're lonely and they're yours, and you'd rather hand over your comfort than watch them struggle. But it isn't. It's a substitution. And eventually the people you're protecting start to mistake your generosity for something they're owed, and you start to mistake their dependence for closeness, and neither of you is actually seeing the other clearly anymore. I did that with Melissa for years. I kept the transfers going because I thought stopping them meant I didn't care. It took a stroke and a changed lock for me to understand that caring and funding are not the same thing. The part about intelligence, about wisdom, really, is that it isn't knowing everything in advance. I didn't know Derek would file that petition. I didn't know Melissa would let him. What wisdom gave me was the ability to respond clearly when it happened, to call Margaret instead of panicking, to make the list, to stop the transfers without drama or negotiation, to walk into that courtroom and let the facts speak without embellishment. And the part about resilience, the part I'm most proud of, honestly, is that I kept showing up for the things worth showing up for. Paige's Sunday calls, Tuesday mornings at the library, Diane's soup, the azaleas coming back every spring. I didn't collapse into bitterness, though I had every reason to. I stayed interested in my own life. That's not a small thing when someone has tried very hard to convince you that your life is no longer yours to manage. Melissa is trying now. I'm watching carefully. Paige is thriving. The azaleas are already budding again. I don't know how the next chapter reads, but I know who's holding the pen.